Good evening here from the UK, from the southwest of England. Hi, I'm Mathura Das. Here to share another live viewing with all you lovely people out there. Dear friends, new and old. It's great to share this with all of you. I'm not going to blabber too much before singing. I'm going to, as every time, be spontaneous. I'm going to be doing my talk later on. I'm going to sing some songs, some chants, and a talk. This talk that I've been having. So please join me. And normally at the end I have another song. So thank you. I'm going to do 3 Oms, a little prayer to my gurus and lineage, and then I'm going to do a chant. So please join with me, or to sing alone. Om Agana Timirandasya Niranjana Salakaya Chakshun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swabadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Juta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sahagrajatam Sahaguna Raghunath Anvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahaguna Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Shri Radha Kanta Namostude Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyaiva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Hari Om Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Om. I'm going to sing quite a well-known bhajan written by Bhaktivinode Thakur and sung by many people. Jagjit Singh has done a brilliant version, and our Guru Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, he used to sing this as a song before giving Bhagavata Pracha in the morning. So it's called Jai Radha Madhava. It's said, it's like a picture of Vrindavan. It's a simple bhajan but contains a lot. And then I will go into Hari Haraya Nama Krishna, but not the. I'm going to do a tune that's kind of influenced a bit by Vishnu Jan Swami, who did a version of this way back in the 70s, and a little bit of Hare Krishna, and then I'll do another song after that. Okay. Hari Om. Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Giri Baradhari Jaya Giri Baradhari Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Giri Baradhari Jaya Giri Baradhari Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Bihari. Jaya Jashoda Nandana Braja Jana Jashoda Nandana Braja Jana Jashoda Nandana Braja Jana Jashoda Nandana Braja Jana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Giri Varadhari Jaya Giri Varadhari Jaya Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Giri Varadhari Jaya Giri Varadhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Giri Varadhari Jaya Giri Varadhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Bolo Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Giri Varadhari Jaya Giri Varadhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Giri Varadhari Jaya Girivaradhari Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana 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 Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Govinda Hari Gopala Hari Govinda Hari Gopala Hari Govinda Hari Gopala Hari Govinda Hari Gopala Hari Jai Jaya Deva Hari Jaya Jaya Deva Hari Jai Prabhu Dina Dayala Hari Jaya Prabhu Dina Dayala Hari Govinda Hari Gopala Hari Govinda Hari Gopala Hari Govinda Hari Gopala Hari Govinda Hari Gopala Hari Jai Jaya Deva Hari Jai Jaya Deva Hari Jaya Jaya Deva Hari Jaya Jaya Deva Hari Vande Krishna Nanda Kumara Vande Krishna Nanda Kumara Nanda Kumara Madana Gopala Nanda Kumara Madana Gopala Madana Gopala Mohan Rupa Madana Gopala Mohan Rupa Mohan Rupa Nanda Dulaya Mohan Rupa Nanda Dulaya Jai Jaya Deva Hari Jai Jaya Deva Hari Jaya Jaya Deva Hari Jaya Jaya Deva Hari Hari Hare Namaha Hari Hare Namaha Krishna Jadavaya Namaha Krishna Yadavaya Namaha Jai Madhavaya, Madhavaya, Keshavaya Namaha. Madhavaya, Madhavaya, Keshavaya Namaha. Gopala Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan. Gopala Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan. Giridhari Gopinatha Madana Mohan. Giridhari Gopinatha Madana Mohan. Hari Hari Namaha. Hari Hari Namaha. Krishna Gadavaya Namaha. Krishna Gadavaya Namaha. Gadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Namaha. Gadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Namaha. Gopala Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan. Gopala Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan. Giridhari Gopinatha Madana Mohan. Giridhari Gopinatha Madana Mohan. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Jai Deva Hari, Jai Jai Deva Hari, Jaya Prabhu Dina Dayala Hari, Jaya Prabhu Dina Dayala Hari, Jaya Jaya Deva Hari. Shri Krishna Bhagavan ki jai. Just have a little sip. I hope you're all feeling fine today, wherever you are. And if you're not, I really pray that you feel better and that healing vibes, or psychologically, physically, emotionally, you feel regenerated and healed. I mean, every day is a new day. We can go up and down and oscillate. There's so many things in the world that are affecting us day by day. And my friends who are in Vrindavan and India at the moment, the heat is really getting up. It's very, very hot. I find it very hard to be there. In England, we're actually having beautiful weather at the moment. It's like everywhere in the world at the moment. The air is so much clearer. The skies seem to be clear everywhere. I mean, someone just showed me a picture today in the River Thames in Richmond, a seal in the River Thames. Incredible. Things are going on, very, very unusual. So those are some of the silver linings of this experience. But as Bob Marley said, so much troubles in the world. And I'm going to sing a little few verses from his song. But actually, I've got a kind of a thing where I actually take that into a Ram chant because it seems to fit really nicely. So please join in with the Sri Ram Jai Ram chant. And even though he says so much trouble in the world, he just says, give a little bit, one more time. It's all about sharing and giving. My lovely friend in Mayapur, who I met when I was there and part of the music department, he was only a young teenager. He's now married with children, Nirmal Sundar. He just showed me pictures today in outside of in Krishnanagar. There's some poor Bihari workers. They're stuck there in the brick kilns and there's no work, and they were out there giving free food to the people. So that's wonderful. People are being looked after. I know that you hear all sorts of awful stories, but I've been hearing stories from Calcutta even, where even poor street people, it's almost for many of them, it's the first time in their lives that they've actually been given cover and food and rations. So there are some kinds of help there for people who are very, very, very in vulnerable positions. And let's pray that more and more people get together and more free food kitchens come about. It's a great time for ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Conscious, to do what they do the best and go out there and give out free food to all the people. So we hope that all goes on. It's very important during these times. It's not so easy for everybody. So here we go, a little bit of Bob Marley, So Much Trouble in the World. It's not everybody knows this song, but I think it's fantastic. So here we go. And please join in the Sri Ram chant. Bless my eyes this morning The sun is on the rise once again. The way things are going, anything can happen, 'cause they're sailing on their ego trip. Blast off on their spaceship, miles from reality. No care for you, no care for me. So much trouble in the world. There is so much troubles in the world. All you've got to do is give a little, give a little, give a little bit one more time, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, 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 Shri Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai 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 Ram, Shri Ram Jai Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. All you gotta do is give a little, give a little, give a little bit one more time, yeah, yeah, yeah. So much trouble in the world, just so much trouble in the world. There is so much trouble in the world. There is so much trouble in the world. All you gotta do is give a little, give a little, give a little bit one more time, yeah, 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 yeah. Bolo, Sri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, 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 Sri Ram. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om. Okay, so I've done a couple of chants now. I wanted to do, I mean, my song repertoire is not extensive. I only have I wrote about 12 songs with Prana Ji, who we are the Bindu Babas. I am Mathura Das, if people have tuned in and they don't know who I am. And this group I have called the Bindu Babas. Okay, I've just got to close my window. So, my neighbor, lovely neighbor, cleaning his car outside. Okay, so we wrote a song, me and Pranaji, about this quandary, perennial philosophical quandary about, especially in India, it's around this theme of unity and diversity, oneness and manyness. All the great philosophers kind of accept that there is a unity of existence, but there is obviously a variegatedness, a diversity. And how is that? Why is that? What does that mean? And there are all these different philosophical systems with their own different angle on what that means, basically. And I am going to sing you a song. I haven't sung it for a while, and I hope I can remember all the words. I've got it here in front of me. It's called The One and the Many, basically. The lineage that I've mentioned that I'm connected to, where I got my name Mathura Das from, is from Bhaktivinode Swami, is from a lineage coming from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu from 500 years ago in Bengal. And there is a philosophical system that was the background, the basis of the philosophy that he taught, that was kind of first, you could say, written down in that form, in the form. It was called, the philosophy was written in about the 18th century or 17th century, actually, by Baladev Vidyabhushan. And he wrote it in India to kind of present to the other Hindu community that this lineage from Chaitanya was a bona fide lineage. And in India, there's quite a heavy weight, like, okay, you say you're a bona fide lineage, where's your commentary on Vedanta Sutras? So Baladev wrote a commentary on the Vedanta Sutras according to the philosophy of Sri Chaitanya, which is really it's not much different than the other Vaishnava bhakti traditions of Ramanuja and Madhava and Vallabha. Except that this one has got its own specific twist on the story. And it's the school of thought, it's called Achintya Bhed Abhed Atattva, which Achintya means inconceivable, and Bhed Abheda means oneness and distinction, oneness and difference, inconceivably. So it's a paradox. The philosophy of Gaudiya Vaishnava explains that reality is a paradox. There is the unity of existence is the supreme absolute truth, and the emanations from the absolute truth, such as the creation and ourselves, we all exist simultaneously one, but we're all simultaneously different. Like the sun and the rays of the sun, like the flower and the scent of the flower. My wonderful dear friend Crispian and his band Kulashekar, they actually got a top hit in the English hit parade in the 90s with their version of Tattva, and they have a great it's a kind of pop rock version explaining that philosophy, as you can see the video on YouTube. But I'm going to do our Bindu Babas song called The One and the Many, and here you go. From the day that time began, we've been searching for the master plan to understand the world and what we are. So many stories have been told, so many stories have been told, endless ideas bought and sold, revelations, dreams and philosophies. Tangled in the web of philosophical speculation, false conclusions and hypotheses. Tangled in an overload of information, offering no release, no release. Who can see the wood, not for the tree? Oh, can see the wood, not for the tree. In this world of duality, of unity and diversity, all is the play of the many and the one. When will we have eyes to see the higher forms of reality, when our delusions and confusions are all gone? Because some of them say identity is an illusion, the absolute no form nor qualities. They deny their souls and the cause of their creation, or claim they are same as the Almighty. Oh Lord, what a catastrophe. Oh Lord, can't see the wood, not for the tree. When a green bird flies into a green tree, she appears to lose herself in all the greenery, but she's still singing there quite happily. She hasn't lost her individuality, oh no. This is the story of the many and the one. So many rays of light bursting from the sun. How inconceivably we are different and one at the same time. At the same time. Constant and intimate, like the waves and the sea. Finite and infinite, share the same qualities, but the source of creation is independent and free, having infinite potentiality. With infinite potentiality. Radi 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 radi, jay 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 shri radi, radi radi radi, jay 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 shri radi, radi 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 radi. Jai 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 Shri Radhe, Radhe 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 Radhe, Jai 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 Shri Radhe. When a green bird flies into a green tree, she appears to lose herself in all the greenery, but she's still singing there quite naturally. She hasn't lost her individuality. Oh no. Radhe Radhe Radhe, Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Radhe Radhe Radhe, Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Radhe 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 Radhe, Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Radhe 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 Radhe, Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Jai 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 Shri Radhe, Jai 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 Shri Radhe, Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Radhe 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 Radhe, Jai 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 Shri Radhe Shyam. Hari Bol. Apologies there for a few little mix-ups on there. I haven't really sung these songs for quite a while, but thank you for bearing with me there. Okay, lots of people. I can just see my lovely friend Albert de Vos from Holland. We go back along Vrishni Vamsa. We did so many wonderful things in Amsterdam back in the day. Lovely to see you there. Hare Krishna. Okay, so I'm back with this story of mine that I want to share with everybody, that I have been sharing. And this is the third part of the story. And anybody who wants to really kind of catch up on the earlier bit of the story, please go and check out my last two live streams. It's quite a big story, and I've tried to sum it up and make it as simple as possible. But the basis of the story, it's really about it's the background behind why this conversation is happening, why my name is Mathuradas, why there are so many people now in the world, Western world specifically, and involved in doing kirtan and yoga and all of these things. And how did the East and the West come together, and how did all this phenomena come about? Really, and we haven't quite got to the actual kind of conclusion of this story, how it actually comes to the West. Where we got to on the last part of my story is we were still at the kind of turn of the 19th century. This is a world where the British are the main superpower in the world, and they have definitely got India under their control, and Calcutta is their capital. And from this place in Bengal, many great thinkers and Bengalis writers came, and philosophers and people who've reinterpreted their own culture, and also have a lot to do with the identity of India in the world that we know it. And the processes that went on, the historical processes where thoughts and ideas from India started to seep into the West. I explained there were certain translations only done at the end of the 18th century, especially into English, and some into German, other languages, and they started to seep into the minds of the intelligentsia and the intellect. And those people specifically who were dissatisfied with kind of Christianity, and also they were intrigued because they were all brought up thinking, led to believe that the Greek philosophy and the Greek culture, ancient, was the highest, and that and all over there, we were going to tell them, all the, us in England and Europe, we were going to show these dark-skinned barbarians with all their primitive habits, how superior Christianity was and the Greek culture. But when the books were translated, all the ancient Vedic texts, the translators realized, my goodness, there's a great, incredible world of knowledge and information that goes back thousands of years, and a living tradition. That's the amazing thing about India. India has the longest, most continuous culture in the world. This is because of very, very strict rules, like in many religions, even in the Judaic religion and other religions, of especially in terms of the information and the knowledge. This has been kept alive by families of Brahmins, really. The priestly caste, you might have all sorts of opinions, but one of the amazing things that they have done is kept alive an ancient tradition, and passing it on orally, basically. You have to understand many things in this story start to change the world and the way that we think over time. For instance, even in the West, in England, they had a poll about who was the most influential person in the world, really, in the last millennium. And they had all sorts of people kind of in this television program, and people voting in. And the person who was actually voted the most influential person was Gutenberg. And you go, Gutenberg? Who's Gutenberg? Gutenberg actually invented the printing press. And you're just saying, well, why is that so significant? Well, they decided, and it's easy to understand, that before a printing press, everything was handwritten, and not everybody was literate, and knowledge and information was in the hands of a few people who were lucky to have written manuscripts or write things out. Then suddenly this invention came, the printing press, and suddenly knowledge could be duplicated and spread on a much vaster scale. That's what happened in Europe, also with the spreading of the split between the Protestant and the Catholic Church was very much influenced by the printing press. It's incredible. If we try to, it was so taboo, printing and information, that in England, during kind of before the King James Bible came out, if somebody was even caught reciting the Bible not in Latin, they could be killed or put in prison. It was and then they translated the Bible into English and printed it, and it just spread like wildfire. And there was also the version in German with Luther, basically. So a similar phenomena starts to happen in Bengali culture and in Indian culture with the arrival of technology. What I didn't actually, I forgot to mention in my last talk was, as this knowledge and information seeped into the West, I forgot to add, even at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of, end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, in the middle part, there was a whole movement in America called the Transcendentalists, headed by the famous philosopher Emerson and Thoreau. And now they were both ardent fans of the Bhagavad Gita and other Indian texts, and they've written about that. And this, just to give you an idea of how much influence Indian philosophy was beginning to have on Western minds. Because it was the age of enlightenment, and it was the fashion of this time, the trend. People have got to that stage in European society where the Industrial Revolution had started, and scientific discoveries were being made, and a whole new paradigm shift had occurred all in the Western world, really. And seeping in the middle of all that was this some of these ideas coming from India, that eventually going to become to the point where people like me, from a middle-class family in southwest London, were going to become influenced by these ideas by the 1970s. So, to get back to the story, at the turn of the century, one of the first major and famous character to arrive from the Indian shores to the West was Swami Vivekananda. And Swami Vivekananda came to a meeting in Chicago, the Council of World Religions, and he was asked to speak, and he gave a very famous speech. And that speech is endlessly echoed by great fans of Vivekananda as a great historic moment. Where he calls on his the other, Caesar's taught friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. He gave his version of that. It's quite inspiring actually. And he had quite a big influence there at that time. And he spent a few years in India, went back to India, went back to America, spent a little time in London, and quite a few people became very, very interested in the ideas that he was beginning to spread. Because up until then, it was almost impossible to imagine 100 years before Westerners and people followers of Christianity kind of being even interested in the ideas coming from India. So there was just a massive step happening at that time. He wasn't the only person. There's lesser known swamis and yogis that went. Premananda Bharati is a very interesting character, and he wrote a book about Krishna, the Lord of Love. That's a very interesting book written in English, and he was coming from a different tradition than Vivekananda. Basically, Vivekananda's guru was Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who was actually illiterate, and he was primarily a bhakta of Kali. And he wasn't a great philosopher, but Vivekananda was educated a person, and so there's lots of stories about their friendship, how they met, how he was influenced, and Vivekananda. Ramakrishna wasn't a sannyasi; he was married to Sharada Devi, and Vivekananda took the order of sannyas, and they formed a kind of a very loose membership. There wasn't very organized, and they called it was a mutt. A mutt is like a monastery or a group of renunciates who live together, and it's a kind of ashram, really. It's called, but another name for it is a mutt. So they set up this organization. So and some remnants of that stayed in England, in America, in the early parts of the 20th century. But unfortunately, Vivekananda and both Premananda Bharati suffer from diabetes, and they didn't live very long. And so the inroads that Premananda Bharati had made, there's sort of some very good, interesting books on him, and he went all over America giving talks about Krishna and stuff. And then the next person who's very famous, most probably more well known in Western circles, was Paramahansa Yogananda, who arrived in the West in the 20s. And he's coming in, his lineage from Sri Yukteswar and Lahiri Mahashaya is a tradition called Kriya Yoga. And but if you see actually pictures of Yogananda and Vivekananda, it's interesting. I'm kind of quite fascinated because of this kind of this great difference between the East and the West, and the predominance of Christianity, and the fact that they were very aware, the English-speaking educated Indians who came to talk of the image, basically, how to look the part. Vivekananda had kind of developed a very interesting style of dress. It was a kind of tunic that crossed over, tied, and he wore a turban, which was obviously very, very Eastern. He didn't wear it all the time. And sometimes he wore a long coat that was almost similar to like a Jesuit type of coat. And Yogananda, in 1920s, he almost adopted and just took on the same dress that Vivekananda had worn, and even a dog collar. I've seen a picture of him with a priest dog collar and a crucifix around his neck. So I find that quite interesting, in the fact that they're trying to bridge this gap between the East and West. And Yogananda, actually, he didn't come back, and he lived till the 50s. Basically, and he had many, many disciples and set up ashrams. Donald Walters, who Swami Kriyananda, he became his disciple, and I think he's still living. And that's a very interesting story. So that was in the 20s. Now, I'm going to flip back to India at this time to bring us into the story that's going to lead us to this specific lineage that I belong to. Now, I mentioned before this character called Kedaranath Dutt, who later became known as Bhaktivinode Thakur. He was born in 1835-ish, and he was one of the very first Bengalis to be a magistrate in the British system in Bengal and Orissa. He was very respected and highly educated, and he went through a journey. He describes that in his autobiography. Now, this philosophy of Sri Chaitanya that had been started before him, over about 400 years before, just under, it had gone through a whole process and years and years and years of development. And you could say, to an extent, it had bifurcated into many sub-branches and branches, which is what happens with religions and teachings. You have somebody that comes off, a disciple of the charismatic leader, the prophet, the avatar, whatever, and they take things forward. And then they have students, and they have students. And then maybe there's a group, and one guy doesn't agree with the other chap, and they form another group. And then there's all sorts of social environments to take into consideration, because like, say, a part of India like Bengal, it's a huge culture that's been going on for hundreds of years with all sorts of subsects. So when philosophies and teachings kind of spread, it's kind of natural that as they spread bigger and bigger and bigger, they take on slightly different forms, really, due to the nature of the different people involved with it. So at the time of Kedaranath Dutt, his family, there'd been a transformation in Bengali culture in about the 18th century, where after the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the influence of Bhakti and Gaudiya and Vaishnavism, Tantra and the worship of the goddess was always there in Bengal. But Krishna Raj, there was a king in Krishnanagar, and I can't remember his name, but I will later. Anyway, he was a great Shakta, and he started to kind of introduce kind of big festivals to the goddess, and he had a big influence. And through him, all over Bengal, kind of Shaktiism and the worship of the goddess kind of regained more footage that it has maybe lost in the development of Bhakti. So at the time of Bhaktivinode Thakur, in the late 19th century, the Vaishnavism had become quite obscure. And as I was mentioning about technology and Gutenberg and the printing press, actually the first printing presses in India were only being set up around this time. So up until that time, if somebody wanted to read, have access to literature belonging to the philosophy of Chaitanya, it was normally handwritten manuscripts. There weren't printed books. And obviously there wasn't many of them. And these were generally kept by the lineages of the Goswami lineages, the priestly lineages that had kind of hereditary, had come in the path of Chaitanya. They're called Goswamis. And so most people, general people, if they wanted to hear about this knowledge and these stories of Chaitanya, they would generally have to go to a temple or an ashram and listen to discourses given on these texts by these people. But it wasn't until as printing presses started to get printed, where people could actually kind of read these literatures. Reading wasn't even a habit. I read an article by a scholar who was discussing, had done research into this, that it was a new phenomena for somebody to go and sit in their house and actually just sit and read a book was a very kind of modern thing for Bengali Indian culture. And it got more and more popular. And this is very important because it shows you how technology is a key factor in ascertaining why things happen and how information is spread, how people get involved with it, how they get involved with the teachings of these cultures. So this is what happened during this period. And it took Bhaktivinode Thakur, and he had a huge family. He had many, many children. And so he had to juggle his life with being a magistrate, doing a lot of research into his own culture, And eventually it took him quite a while to get authentic literatures, even in Bengal, just to show you kind of how, even at that time, it was kind of obscure. Then India's a massive place, and there's so many, and there's a part of Bengal and a culture and a tradition from this area, and it had gone over hundreds of years. And in that process, some of the knowledge had become a bit obscure. So he describes this in his biography. It took him a while but when he got hold of that literature and realized actually what was the philosophy of Chaitanya and his followers, the six Goswamis, he was astounded and amazed. And it took him a while to kind of find what he considered a group of Vaishnavas that he wanted to align himself with. And he eventually took initiation around the age of 40. Took him that long to take initiation into the Vaishnava lineage. But even before that, he was writing all sorts of texts and giving talks, and in English. And he wrote, I think it's the very first book in English on Sri Chaitanya, His Life and Teachings. And he printed in English a small volume, and he sent some of these off to the West, to Thoreau, to Emerson, at least to Emerson, and to certain universities. And in the 60s, some disciples of Bhaktivinode Swami actually discovered in McGill University in Canada some original copy that had been sent by Kedarnath Dutt. So that was and then he wrote a lovely book based on a lecture called the Bhagavata, Its Theology and Ethics, in English. So Bhaktivinode Thakur and all of these teachers, Swami Vivekananda, who came later, and they were all influenced to an extent by the influence of Christianity. You couldn't avoid it. And there's many different branches of Christianity. One specific branch is called Unitarian. And there was one specific teacher of Unitarian Christianity in Calcutta that Kedarnath Bhaktivinode Thakur became attracted to. Because in India, there are all these different schools of thought, really, and some of them kind of verge on almost a form of atheism. And as the song I sang earlier was about the one and the many, some of the schools of thought, specifically those of Advaita, it's quite ambiguous, the kind of what is Godhead? What is the Supreme Godhead? And bhakti and devotion was not really kind of prominent in those teachings. Whereas Bhaktivinoda Thakur discovered, after going into the philosophy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that there was this incredible teaching and philosophy. And he made a kind of a mission and he actually had a vision that actually this teaching is for everybody, because within the teachings of Chaitanya in the books, it is like, as I mentioned yesterday, Chaitanya mentioned that his name would be heard all over the world, which seemed ludicrous in the 15th and 16th century. But at that time of Kedarnath Dutt, it was much more feasible. The world had got smaller in a sense, you see. Now, due to technology and travel and the boats that were coming much quicker to India, the world had got smaller, and the language of English was one of the great parts of that. So he went on a big mission he actually stated at that time, I think in 1870, there will come a day when Russians, Japanese, English, and Indians will congregate together and chant Hare Krishna, Hare Bol together in India. And that must have sounded really, really strange almost incomprehensible, really, for most people, that this teaching from this obscure part of Bengal would have any relevance to Westerners. But he was convinced. And he started to print these books in English, and he was on a mission. And he set up his own printing press. And his family, he had two sons who were to develop into prominent Vaishnavas. One specifically was called his son Bimala Prasad Datta. He would later become known as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And he showed signs of being a prodigy from an early age. Apparently, he could recite the whole Bhagavad Gita when he was 5 years old. And he assisted his father as he grew older with his printing presses and the mission of his father. And he was, you could say, he took on the mission in a supportive role to spread, to help spread the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu outside the confines of just Bengal. And this was going to take a while for this to happen. You see, first of all, they even had to kind of like make Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his teachings even understandable, even outside of Bengal and other parts of India, where some people had heard of Chaitanya, but not many. And when Bhaktivinode Thakur passed, in the later days of his life, he retired a bit more from all of this activity and went into a retreat and bhajan, which is in very meditative state, which is what is really recommended generally in the Vedic scriptures, that especially if people have been students and then into grihastha or married life and then retirement, it was recommended for men to retreat into to prepare for the passing from this mortal world into the spiritual dimension, because it's considered very important in Indian spirituality. And Bhaktivinode Thakur, that's what he did. Basically, he retreated and he passed from this world in 1914. Now, it's interesting because the British Empire had been on an up and an up and an up and an up. And then in 1857 was what the West English called the mutiny or the uprising. This is when in India, that gradually, over a time, the populace of India started to, they rebelled many times, but it was, they'd had enough, basically, of being ruled by colonialists, foreign powers. They wanted their own rule. And this was, during Bhaktivinode's time, was not so strong, but then it started to get stronger and stronger and stronger. The British Empire reached its kind of zenith, you could say, at the end of the Victorian period, the end of the 19th century. And as we got to, really, you can say, the kind of the British Empire's power had really waned by the First World War, and already America was becoming the major, beginning to become the big superpower in the world. So during that period of the life of Bhaktivinode Thakur, he worked under the British rule, but during his lifetime there was a big agitation in India, and other famous Indian leaders that became spiritual people, Sri Aurobindo, they were very active in the movement to get rid of the British out of India, basically. They were getting more confidence in their own identity and their own beliefs and their own culture that had been suppressed and by the British. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the son of Bhaktivinode Thakur, he inherited this vision of his father. And after his father passed, he went through a period of a brat, a vow, Purushcharan, where he chanted tons and tons of names of Krishna every day on his beads, ate very little, did an austerity. And during this period of time, he wanted to develop enough spiritual strength to be able to take this tradition and this specific branch of the tradition that had been taken up by his father and develop it. So at a certain period, he kind of came out of this mode of reclusiveness and got into active mode. And he was an incredibly brilliant speaker, charismatic, incredibly learned. And he developed, a bit like Ramakrishna had developed his followers and Vivekananda, and they developed a mutt. It's interesting as well, I think, that Vivekananda was a datta. His name was Narendra Datta. And here we have another datta, Bimala Prasad Datta becoming Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. The same name, a few years difference. And I also believe there was a slight kind of competition, in a sense, between these two, because the teachings that Vivekananda were teaching were not, even his followers wouldn't say this is orthodox or it's traditional Christianity. Christianity, Hinduism. He or Vaishnavism. He created. It was more akin to the Advaita teachings of Shankara, but with his own kind of Bengali contribution to that teaching. Even his guru Ramakrishna was not really into Advaita of Shankaracharya. Vivekananda more so. So there was and the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, their philosophical understanding about Godhead and the interpretation of the Vedas was quite a bit different. And so there was a little bit of a competition, and they both had their mutts. You had this Ramakrishna mutt, and with Vivekananda and other sannyasis from that, and then you had Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he carried on with his father's mission. They had printing presses. He inspired many intelligent young Bengalis to join him in his mission. And gradually through the 20s, these followers, they went all over India and even to different parts of Burma and places, and established centers. And in India and Madras, I think they established maybe 50, 60 different centers all over India. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati himself used to travel to these different centers and give talks. And it was during this period of the beginning of setting up this Gaudiya Math that our guru, who's known as A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, was then called Abhay Charan Dey. That's what the A.C. stands for, Abhay Charan, and his family name was Dey. And he was actually born into a traditional family of Vaishnavas. His father was a very, very devout Vaishnava. But also at the same time in India, this Quit India movement had gained momentum. And the most prominent famous personality really in India who became internationally famous was Gandhi, who later became known as Mahatma Gandhi, a title that Rabindranath Tagore created for Mohandas Gandhi. Prabhupada was a very powerful person, Gandhi, and he had a lot of influence because he developed a lot of respect amongst younger people, because he wasn't just a materialistic politician. He seemed to have kind of deep spiritual understanding, and he was following his own way. So up until then, Abhay Charan Dey, Bhaktivedanta Swami, to become later, he wasn't very impressed with most of the sadhus and holy people that he had met and seen and come encountered with at that time, and connected with the philosophy of Chaitanya, even though his family had been connected. And they had family gurus, traditional gurus, but they had not really made an impression on him. And then one day, one of his friends, college friends, who had actually gone to a talk by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati in Calcutta, told Abhay Charan, and he convinced him to come, even though Abhay was reluctant. He said, "No, I don't want to go. I've seen all these guys before." But when he took him to this meeting, he was actually shocked and impressed. His was somebody who was speaking on a very different level and a different style, different kind of character. And immediately he felt that this is a person who is actually a bona fide representative of Sri Chaitanya that I can actually follow and accept as a teacher. And while this talk was going on, Abhay Charan had asked a question saying about, because Indian independence was such a big thing amongst people's in people's minds in India at that time. He asked Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, don't we need to get our own independence in India and get on our own feet and become strong before we kind of like go too deeply into all of these kind of spiritual things? If we just focus on that, our whole kind of like social movement will wane. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati convinced him that actually, whatever the situation is in life, whatever system is there, always the prerogative and the main goal and the importance of life should always be the spiritual perspective. But it was the way with which he explained that had a lot of influence on Abhay Charan. And after that meeting, he realized that this is my spiritual master. And Abhay, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati could see that he spoke English. He was educated in the English system, and he kind of said, even then on that first meeting, had said, it is your duty as educated Bengalis and followers of Chaitanya, it is your duty to take this teaching and help distribute it, specifically in the Western-speaking worlds, the English-speaking worlds at that time. Now, this is very important because this is basically due to that instruction and the fact that Abhay Charan Dey, who became Bhaktivedanta Swami, took up that instruction, that I am here today, and I am here with the name of Mathura Das, basically. And so I kind of brought you up to that point in the story. And I think that I thought I was going to talk about psychedelics today, but I don't think I've got enough time, really. I'm just looking at the time. It's about 8 o'clock. I've talked for a while. Maybe I'll just I'll conclude a bit more from this, because basically what happened was Bhaktisiddhanta, he passed away in 1937. And basically, some of his Bhaktivedanta Swami didn't join the Mutt, the organization of his guru. He was a married man, and he started a company and worked first of all, he worked for somebody, and he studied chemistry and a pharmacy, and he started his own company. Days, it's called Days. He made liniments and creams and things and produced them. His idea was at that time that I am a grihasta. My role is different than a sannyasi. He was aligned to the different mutts, and he used to go along and participate in their activities and do kirtan. But at the same time, he was trying to make a business so he could support his family and also have money and support the mutt. The organization, it was called the Gaudiya Mutt. It's called the Gaudiya Vaishnavism because the area of Bengal was called Gauda Desh, basically. And so the Vaishnavism that comes from that area is called Gaudiya Vaishnavism, but sometimes it is called Chaitanyite Vaishnavism because it specifically means that which comes. Gaudiya Vaishnavism means Chaitanyite Vaishnavism. So during that period, the Gaudiya Mutt grew and grew and grew. And like all institutions around the world, in fact, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, this is, I find interesting, even though he set up an organization to do a specific job, he realized that generally religions and organizations can be some of the worst type of organizations in the world, and actually are guilty of the biggest aberrations of the truth that can exist and towards humanity at large. And he had a bit of a quandary, and he also realized that there was a great risk of doing what he was going to do. And his kind of doubts, you could say, about certain aspects of that were kind of they were played out afterwards. He was actually kind of true, because he noticed that after some years, and they got centers. What happens is, when you're growing an institution, you need to have competent followers who can run a place. You need to have a place where people can come, hear kirtan, take prasadam, hear discourses. It means property. Property means rent. It means money. You had to suddenly the organization had got involved with buildings, really maintaining them, sustaining them, and people and hierarchies developing to run these. And in his mutt, the people who were at the head of it were not the grihastas or the married people. They were the renunciates. They were the sannyasis and their students, the brahmacharis. The sannyasis. Also, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati did something very, very revolutionary in the Gaudiya lineage. Up until that time, the renunciates were called Babajis, and they wore white cloth. Most North Indian Vaishnavas wore white cloth. You might think this is a trivial detail, but it was quite important. They were distinguished from the followers of Shankara, who the Dashnami, all the different sannyasis and that lineage who wore saffron, and they used to have a ek danda, a stick which represents oneness. Whereas in South India, in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, Ramanuja Sampradaya, that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was very impressed with, he liked he thought that the Tridandi, which means one, it's a symbol, that it's a stick of bamboo covered in saffron cloth with two sticks at the top joined, and it represents someone who is surrendered their body, mind, and words into to the Lord. It had a more devotional connotations. So he changed the dress. So the followers of the Gaudiya Math, for many people, they couldn't really tell that they were Vaishnavas because they weren't traditionally wearing the white cloth. It was a new innovation. It was one of the innovations that he made. Okay, so this so what actually happened was that by the after he passed in 1937, there was the inevitable, and I use that word inevitable because it's a word that's going to carry on into the International Society of Krishna Consciousness story, because Bhaktivedanta Swami, he witnessed all of this, and he actually saw, it was very painful for many members, and specifically him, to see that his guru, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, had set up this institution, but it started to show all the negative signs of institutionalization. There was squabbling, peers amongst themselves, and disagreements about certain things. And at one point, he became a bit upset about it, and he said, I prefer to sell all the marble in this temple. He was talking about the center in Bug Bazaar in Calcutta, and just print books, because he could see that it was having these institutions and monasteries and places was a kind of, there was a danger that people could lose the plot spiritually and get involved in all sorts of things which were kind of a deviation from the ultimate spiritual teaching of what this whole philosophy was about, which was really about experiencing divine pure love for Krishna. It was got nothing to do with anything material. So it was a quandary. How do you spread a teaching that is going to inspire people to develop love of God without kind of getting involved in all the traps and misgivings that nearly all religions fall into? And it didn't really, because what happens is that the charismatic teacher, the person who sets up has the spiritual acumen, the followers aren't on the same level, are they? Really, they're students. They have come to the teacher to learn how to advance spiritually. They are not as advanced as their teacher generally. That is why they've gone to a teacher. And so what happens is you're handing over a lot of responsibility to people who are not actually have arrived at the goal of the teaching. Even they're on the way. They're in the midway. They're called the madhyamas. The masses and the general masses are called the kanishtas, the people who are the lay people who are kind of dealing with lots of worldly things, and spirituality is a part of their life. And then you have the madhyamas, who are very deeply devoted, but they haven't quite arrived yet at the final destination. So that's actually what happened in the Gaudiya Math, and Prabhupada witnessed this. And after his guru's passing in 1937, for about 10 years, leading up to the independence of India in 1947, the Gaudiya Math got involved in all sorts of fragmentation and squabbles, basically, and to the point that many of the members, they just they couldn't work together as a solidified organization. But just before Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati passed, in the end of the 30s, he sent one of his students to the West, who was called Bon Maharaj, highly educated, very good looking, made a good presentation of bhakti. And he, if you look at the picture of Vivekananda in 1890, then the picture of Yogananda in 1920, and then you jump to 30s, and you see a picture of Bon Maharaj. He was dressed in exactly the same outfit that had been set up. It was a kind of a precedent. It was the turban, it was the costume, it was to kind of introduce priests, spiritual teachers to a Western audience. And he came to the West, and he had reasonable success, but it was very limited because the time the Bhaktivinode Swami was going to come much later was not quite ripe. And he got to meet, he even had an audience with the King of England at that time. George, I think, was the king. And he met all sorts of interesting people. One of the characters who I'm quite fascinated by is Sir Francis Younghusband. Sir Francis Younghusband had been a military hero of the British Raj, but when he led the British up into Tibet and went to Tibet, he had kind of a whole conversion into spirituality, had mystical experiences, and actually changed his whole kind of like, originally he wanted to go off as a soldier of Christ and to spread Christianity to all the barbarians. And then he became very sympathetic, like other people like Annie Besant and people like that. And he was a very interesting chap. And when Bon Maharaj met him, and I've seen some literature where even Francis Younghusband had become was kind of the secretary of the Gaudiya Math at that time in England. And he initiated some foreign ladies, and those two ladies became followers of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and they utilized their house in London, which is still there to this day. And my dear friend Madan, he, after spending some time in ISKCON, went there and took initiation from the next Gaudiya Math guru in that lineage, because it's still going on there to this day. So that's, there was some influence. And also he even went to, Bon Maharaj went to Germany and met high-ranking members of the Nazi party. He did that much, and he made some German devotees as well. And he came back. There's a very famous picture when he returned back just before Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati passed. He arrived in Calcutta, and there's a picture with Bon Maharaj, two Germans dressed in robes, and right at the side you can see a picture of Abhay Charan De, Bhaktivinanda, who'd actually got the name Aravinda. So his name was not Abhay Charan Aravinda. Now he'd received initiation from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he was sitting at the edge of the picture with a moustache. I like that. And he was wearing he looked like a Paka Bengali babu, a well-off, middle-class Indian gentleman. It's one of the earlier great pictures I like of Prabhupada at that time. But what happened was the Gaudiya Math split, basically, and different members of it, because they couldn't work together, they had these different properties, and some took this property, some took that property, some just completely just disappeared. Sridhar Maharaj came and actually stayed in Calcutta in Prabhupada's, where he had an extra room, and Sridhar Maharaj lived there during this period. They all went off. There was Madhav Maharaj, Puri Maharaj, and Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, and they all had their separate centres, really. Some took on the major centres. The major centre was the Bug Bazar Gaudiya Math in Calcutta, and the other main centre was in Mayapur, the birthplace of Chaitanya. And during this period, when the Gaudiya Math was splitting, Prabhupada was running his company, and he was also started the mission that had been given order by his guru. In fact, just 2 weeks before Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati passed, and also at a later meeting in Radhakund, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati told Abhay Charan Aravinda that your duty is to spread this teaching in the English language. He gave him this service to perform, and it was this duty that kind of weighed as heavily on Prabhupada, Abhay Charan De at that time, and he started to print with his own money and effort a magazine called Back to Godhead. And they're all of that. You can still see and have, if you want to read any of these early Back to Godhead, you can read the early articles. This was during his married period. So I'm going to, so this story that he went through, I'm going to have to carry on tomorrow or the next day with this story to complete that story, because it's too much to tell today. But this story is going to lead up to the point where Bhakti Vedanta, who's not Bhakti Vedanta, yeah, he's still Abhay Charan, is going to become Bhakti Vedanta Swami, and the story of how he actually came to the West and why the timing of when he eventually made it at the ripe age of 68 in 1965, why it's so crucial. Okay, and then I'm also going to tell you the other story of these two ripple effects. This is the Hare Krishna ripple effect, and then there's going to be the psychedelic ripple effect, which is coming from a totally different direction in Europe, but is going to spread through Europe. And this is going to be paving the way for the mindset of the kind of foreigner, Westerners that Prabhupada is going to meet when he arrives in America in the 60s. So there you go. I've continued the story so far, and I think I'm going to sing another song just to end up with. So thank you for hearing that story. I hope you found it interesting. Went off on a few tangents there, but I don't have any script here. I'm just going through this as it happens, so I hope you enjoy that. Okay. I'm just going to do a bit of Om Namo Narayanaya. That's it, just to end up with. Om Namo Excuse me. Shanti, 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 Hari Om Shanti. I had to cut that a little bit. My throat was a bit of a tickle. I couldn't sing. Sorry about that. Look, lots of love to all of you, wherever you are, whenever you hear this. Um, let's all try and stay in our power, in our spiritual power, and not let fear, anxiety, and lots of the negative energies which are floating around on the planet at the moment get to us and bring us down. Let us stay cheerful and happy despite everything, and look for the silver linings. And as I say, you are all part of my silver lining. So thank you for joining me. And I feel very honored and lucky to have this opportunity to share all of this with you. And I will announce tomorrow on the internet whether I'm going to do another viewing tomorrow or the next days, but I'm still continuing. So thank you very much. Hari Om, Hari Om.